Part 1. The Unexpected Encounter. The morning sun painted the mountain chapel in golden light as guests filled the wooden pews. Everyone in Pine Valley had come to see their doctor's daughter marry the rich businessman from the city. The bride stood at the altar in her grandmother's pearl necklace, her white dress flowing like water in the gentle breeze. Everything was perfect. The flowers were fresh from the valley gardens. The photographer snapped pictures of what would surely be the wedding of the year. The groom, dressed in his expensive suit, smiled confidently as he waited for his bride to say, "I do." But something felt wrong to the bride. Standing there in her beautiful dress, she felt like she was wearing someone else's life. The chapel, the guests, even the man beside her. It all felt like a dream that wasn't quite hers. The minister opened his book and began the ceremony. His voice echoed through the small chapel as he spoke about love and commitment. The guests listened quietly, some wiping tears from their eyes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. If anyone knows why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace, the minister said, just like in all the movies. Usually this part of the wedding is just a formality. Nobody ever speaks up. But today was different. A deep voice came from the back of the chapel. "I'm sorry, but I can't let this happen." Everyone turned around in shock. There, standing in the last pew, was a man nobody expected to see. He was tall and broad, with a thick beard and clothes that looked like they'd seen many mountain winters. His boots were muddy and his flannel shirt was faded from years of sun and work. The bride's heart stopped. She knew that voice. She knew those eyes, even though they were different now, older, sadder, but still the same deep brown she remembered from long ago. The groom stepped forward, anger flashing across his face. "Who are you? This is a private ceremony. You need to leave right now." The mountain man didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the bride, searching her face for something he'd lost years ago. "Tell him who I am, Lucy," he said quietly. "Tell him about the boy next door." Lucy's hands began to shake. The bouquet of wildflowers trembled in her grip. How was this possible? How was he here now on this day? The guests started whispering among themselves. Some recognized the man as the hermit who lived high up in the mountains, the one children were told to stay away from. Others had no idea who he was but could feel the tension filling the chapel like smoke. "Security!" the groom shouted. "Get this man out of here!" But there was no security at this small mountain wedding, just families and friends who had come to celebrate what they thought would be a simple, beautiful ceremony. Lucy's father stood up from the front pew. "Now see here, young man. This is my daughter's wedding day. You have no right to interrupt." The mountain man finally looked away from Lucy, his gaze moving to her father. "Dr. Chen, you remember me. I'm Daniel Morrison. I used to live next door to you on Maple Street before you moved to the big house on the hill." Dr. Chen's face went pale. He did remember. Daniel Morrison, the quiet boy who had helped with yard work every summer. The boy who had been Lucy's best friend until she left for college in the city. Lucy found her voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Danny?" The nickname hit him like a physical blow. Nobody had called him that in 15 years. Danny was the boy who had climbed trees and caught fireflies. Danny was the boy who had promised to wait forever. Daniel was the man who had learned that forever was too long for most people. "Do you remember me, mountain man?" Lucy asked, her voice growing stronger. "I was the girl next door long ago." The chapel fell completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. The only sound was the wind through the pine trees and Lucy's wedding dress rustling as she turned fully to face the man who had just turned her world upside down. Daniel's weathered hands clenched at his sides. For 15 years, he had imagined this moment. Sometimes in his dreams, sometimes in his nightmares, but never like this. Never with her in a wedding dress about to marry someone else. "I remember everything," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I remember the girl who used to sneak out her bedroom window to watch the stars with me. I remember the girl who said she'd come back after college. I remember the girl who carved her initials next to mine in the old oak tree. Lucy's bouquet fell from her hands, scattering wildflowers across the chapel floor. The pearls around her neck suddenly felt too tight. The dress that had seemed so perfect that morning now felt like a costume she couldn't wait to take off. Her groom grabbed her arm. "Lucy, whatever this is about, it's in the past. We're getting married today. Don't let some vagrant ruin our future." But Lucy wasn't hearing him anymore. She was remembering summer evenings on the porch swing, talking about dreams and plans. She was remembering promises made under a star-filled sky. She was remembering the boy who had said he would wait for her no matter how long it took. Daniel took a step closer, and Lucy could see the pain in his eyes, pain she had put there by staying away so long, pain she had caused by building a life that didn't include him. "I waited," he said simply. "I waited until I realized you weren't coming back. Then I heard about the wedding in the newspaper, and I couldn't let you make a mistake." "A mistake?" the groom shouted. "Lucy, tell this madman to leave us alone. We have a life planned together. A good life." Lucy looked between the two men, one offering security and social status, the other offering a love she had tried to forget. In that moment, standing in her grandmother's dress with her entire future hanging in the balance, she realized she had to choose. But how do you choose between the life you've built and the life you've always dreamed of? How do you choose between what's practical and what's real? The mountain man waited, his heart breaking all over again as he watched the woman he'd never stopped loving struggle with the biggest decision of her life. The guests watched in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about in Pine Valley for years to come. And Lucy stood frozen between two worlds, knowing that whatever she decided in the next few moments would change everything forever. The chapel bells began to chime in the distance, marking the hour when she was supposed to become Mrs. Richard Blackwood. Instead, she was face to face with the ghost of her past, and for the first time in years, she felt truly awake. Part 2. Memories. Resurfaced, Lucy's head was spinning. The chapel felt too small, too crowded, too full of expectations she couldn't meet. Without thinking, she gathered up her dress and ran toward the side door that led to the small garden behind the chapel. "Lucy, wait!" her groom called after her, but she was already gone. The garden was quiet and peaceful, filled with the smell of roses and mountain air. Lucy sat down on an old wooden bench and tried to catch her breath. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She heard footsteps on the gravel path and looked up to see Daniel walking toward her slowly, like he was approaching a frightened animal. He stopped a few feet away and stuffed his hands in his pockets. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to ruin your wedding day. When I saw the announcement in the paper, I couldn't stay away." Lucy stared at him, really seeing him for the first time since he'd appeared in the chapel. His face was older now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into mountain sun. His hands were rough and calloused from hard work. This wasn't the boy she remembered. This was a man who had lived a completely different life from hers. 15 years, Danny," she whispered. 15 years and not a word. He sat down on the other end of the bench, careful to keep distance between them. "I wrote letters. Hundreds of them. I just never sent them." "Why not?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching a butterfly land on a nearby flower. "Because every letter I wrote sounded like I was asking you to give up your dreams for mine, and I couldn't do that to you." Lucy felt tears starting in her eyes. "But I was waiting to hear from you. After the first year of college, when you didn't write back to my letters, I thought you'd forgotten about me." "Forgotten?" Daniel's voice was full of pain. "Lucy, I never got any letters from you. Not one." They stared at each other in shock. 15 years of hurt and misunderstanding suddenly made sense. Somehow their letters had never reached each other. Maybe they'd been lost in the mail, or maybe Lucy's parents had intercepted them, thinking they were protecting their daughter from what they saw as a dead-end relationship. "I waited too," Lucy said softly. "The first 2 years of college, I kept thinking you'd show up at my dorm or call the school. When you didn't, I figured you'd moved on with your life." "I did move on, eventually," Daniel admitted. "But not the way you think." He told her about the years after she left, how he'd worked 3 jobs to save money for college, planning to follow her to the city, how his father had gotten sick and they'd lost the family farm trying to pay medical bills, how his parents had died in a car accident the winter after she graduated, leaving him alone with debts and responsibilities he'd never expected. "I couldn't leave after that," he said. "My younger sister needed someone to take care of her. The farm was gone, but I got work at the lumber mill and rented a small house in town. I put Beth through school instead of going myself." Lucy listened with growing understanding. While she'd been building her career in the city, thinking he'd abandoned their plans, he'd been dealing with tragedy and sacrifice she'd never known about. "Where's Beth now?" she asked. "Married, living in Denver. She's a teacher, has 2 kids. Daniel smiled for the first time since she'd seen him. "I'm proud of her. She got out of Pine Valley and made something of herself, just like you did. But what about you? What happened to you?" Daniel's smile faded. "After Beth graduated and moved away, I realized I didn't know how to live for myself anymore. I'd spent so many years taking care of everyone else that I forgot what I actually wanted." He told her about the day he'd sold everything he owned and moved up into the mountains, how he'd built a cabin with his own hands, far from the town that held too many painful memories, how he'd learned to live off the land, making furniture and crafts that he sold to tourists to earn enough money for the few things he couldn't make himself. "People in town started calling me the Mountain Man," he said with a bitter laugh. "Some crazy hermit who lives in the woods. Maybe they're right." "You're not crazy," Lucy said firmly. "You're just hurt. We both are." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun move across the garden. Lucy could hear voices from inside the chapel, her groom and her parents, probably planning what to do about this disaster. "Tell me about your life," Daniel said finally. "Are you happy? Really happy?" Lucy thought about her apartment in the Eon city, her successful law practice, her engagement to a man who could give her everything money could buy. On paper, her life was perfect. But sitting here in this quiet garden, she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly happy. "I thought I was," she said honestly. "Richard is a good man. He's successful. He's kind to me. He wants the same things I want." "What things?" "Security, a nice house, a stable future." Even as she said the words, they sounded empty. "And love?" Daniel asked quietly. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Love. When was the last time she and Richard had talked about love? They talked about their 5-year plan, their retirement goals, their social calendar. But love? "Richard loves me," she said, but her voice didn't sound convincing even to herself. "I didn't ask if he loves you. I asked if you love him." Before Lucy could answer, her groom appeared in the garden doorway. Richard looked perfectly put together even in the middle of a crisis. His expensive suit wasn't wrinkled, his hair was still perfectly styled. "Lucy, enough of this nonsense," he said, firmly. "Our guests are waiting. The photographer is getting impatient. We need to finish this ceremony and get on with our lives." He barely glanced at Daniel, dismissing him like he was nothing more than an annoying interruption. "Give us a few more minutes," Lucy said. "No." Richard's voice was sharp. "I've been patient enough. This man has no business being here, and I won't let him destroy our wedding day with some fantasy about the past." Daniel stood up slowly. Even in his simple mountain clothes, he looked more real, more solid than Richard in his designer suit. "She's not property," Daniel said calmly. "She can make her own choices." "Don't tell me about my fiancé," Richard snapped. "I know what's best for Lucy. I can give her things you never could, a real home, financial security, a place in society." "Can you give her love?" Daniel asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's face flushed red with anger, and Lucy realized she was about to witness a confrontation that would force her to make the choice she'd been avoiding. Standing between these 2 men in her wedding dress, she understood that this wasn't just about choosing between them. It was about choosing between 2 completely different versions of herself. The successful city lawyer she'd become, or the girl who used to dream under the stars. The afternoon sun was getting lower, and she knew that whatever happened next would change the course of her life forever. Part 3. The Truth About the Mountain. Man Lucy looked between the two men, her heart torn in different directions. Richard represented everything she'd worked for: success, stability, the approval of her family and friends. But Daniel represented something else entirely. A part of herself she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. "I need to know," she said suddenly, surprising both men. "Danny, I need to understand what really happened to you. What made you become the person everyone whispers about in town?" Richard threw up his hands in frustration. "Lucy, this is ridiculous. We have a reception to get to, a honeymoon planned. You can't throw away our entire future for some childhood crush." But Lucy was already walking toward Daniel, her white dress trailing behind her like a ghost. "Show me," she said. "Show me where you live now. I need to see it." Daniel hesitated. "It's not what you're used to, Lucy. It's just a simple cabin up in the mountains." "I don't care. I need to understand who you've become." Richard stepped between them. "Absolutely not. I'm not letting my wife-to-be run off into the mountains with some stranger." "I'm not your wife yet," Lucy said quietly, and the words hit Richard like a slap. An hour later, Lucy found herself hiking up a narrow mountain trail, still wearing her wedding dress but having traded her delicate shoes for a pair of hiking boots someone had found in the chapel's lost and found box. Daniel walked ahead of her, occasionally looking back to make sure she was keeping up. The trail was steep and rocky, winding through thick pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. Lucy's dress kept catching on branches, and she was breathing hard from the climb, but she didn't complain. She needed to see this through. "Why did you really come to the chapel today?" she asked as they paused to rest beside a mountain stream. Daniel sat down on a fallen log and was quiet for a long time. "Because I've been living like a ghost for 15 years, he said finally. "And when I read about your wedding in the paper, I realized I was about to watch the last piece of my old life disappear forever. But you chose to leave society behind. You became the mountain man by choice." "Did I?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Lucy, after my parents died and Beth moved away, I tried to live a normal life in town. I dated other women, tried to forget about you. But everywhere I went, I saw reminders of who I used to be when you were in my life." He told her about the years of trying to fit back into Pine Valley society. How people looked at him with pity after his family's tragedies. How women were interested in him until they learned he had no money, no prospects beyond his job at the lumber mill. "One day I was walking past our old house, the one where you used to live before your dad got successful and moved to the hill," Daniel said. "New people were living there and they'd cut down the oak tree, the one where we carved our initials." Lucy felt her heart break a little. That tree had been special to them, their secret meeting place, where they'd made all their plans and promises. "That's when I knew I couldn't stay in town anymore. Everything that mattered to me was gone and I was just pretending to be alive." They reached his cabin as the sun was starting to set. Lucy had expected something rough and primitive, but what she found surprised her. The cabin was beautiful in its simplicity. Well-built log walls, a stone chimney, windows that looked out over the entire valley below. Inside, everything was handmade but skillfully crafted. The furniture looked like it belonged in an expensive mountain resort. The walls were lined with books and there was artwork everywhere. Paintings of mountain scenes, carved wooden sculptures, pottery that looked like it came from a gallery. "You made all of this?" Lucy asked, running her hand along a dining table that was smoother than silk. "I had a lot of time to learn new skills," Daniel said, lighting an oil lamp as darkness fell outside. "Turns out I'm good with my hands." Lucy walked around the cabin, taking in every detail. This wasn't the home of a crazy hermit. This was the home of an artist, someone who had created beauty in isolation. "Danny, this is incredible. You could sell these pieces for thousands of dollars in the city." "I do sell some things," he admitted. "Tourist shops in town, craft fairs online. I make enough to get by." "Just enough to get by?" This furniture is museum quality. Daniel shrugged. I don't need much. No rent, no car payment, no expensive clothes. I grow my own food, hunt when I need meat, trade with neighbors for things I can't make. Lucy sat down in a chair by the fireplace, and Daniel built a small fire to ward off the mountain chill. As the flames danced, she tried to picture him living here alone year after year, creating beautiful things that hardly anyone would ever see. Don't you get lonely? She asked. Every day, he said honestly. But I got tired of being lonely around other people. At least up here, the loneliness is honest. They talked through the night, sharing stories of the years they'd spent apart. Lucy told him about law school, about the pressure to succeed, about building a career that impressed everyone, but somehow left her feeling empty. Daniel told her about learning to live with silence, about finding peace in simple things, about the tourist who occasionally hiked up to his cabin and called him a mountain man like it was something to be feared. The funny thing is, Daniel said as dawn began to brighten the windows, I started to like the reputation. People left me alone, which was what I wanted. But somewhere along the way I started believing it myself. Started thinking I really was some kind of wild hermit who didn't belong in civilized society. You're not wild, Lucy said softly. You're just free. Free? Daniel looked surprised. I've been hiding up here for 10 years, Lucy. How is that free? Because you're living honestly. You're not pretending to be someone you're not, or doing things just because society expects them. How many people can say that? As the sun rose over the mountains, Lucy realized something that shocked her. In this simple cabin, wearing a dirty wedding dress and sitting by a dying fire, she felt more like herself than she had in years. Maybe even more than she ever had. But she also realized that her entire life was waiting for her back in the valley. Her family, her career, her commitments. Richard was probably calling every authority he could think of, trying to find her. The wedding guests had probably gone home confused and gossiping about what they'd witnessed. I have to go back, she said reluctantly. Daniel nodded, though she could see the pain in his eyes. I know. I shouldn't have asked you to come up here. This isn't your world anymore. Isn't it? Lucy asked. How do you know what my world is? They made the hike back down to town in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. At the edge of Pine Valley, Daniel stopped. This is where I leave you, he said. Your real life is down there. Don't let me mess it up any more than I already have. Lucy wanted to argue, but she could see the lights of town ahead and knew he was right. Whatever happened next, she had to face it alone. But as she walked away from him toward the life she'd built, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking away from the person she was meant to be. Part 4. Two Worlds Collide. When Lucy finally made it back to town, still wearing her dirty wedding dress, she found chaos waiting for her. Richard had called the police, convinced that the mountain man had kidnapped his bride. Her parents were frantic with worry. The wedding guests had scattered, but the gossip was spreading through Pine Valley like wildfire. Lucy's mother rushed to embrace her as she walked into the family home. Thank goodness you're safe. That man didn't hurt you, did he? Danny didn't. Hurt me, Mom. He would never hurt me. Her father paced the living room, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Lucy, do you have any idea what you've done? Richard is talking about suing that man for disrupting the wedding. The whole town is talking about our family like we're some kind of soap opera. Richard stood by the window, his expensive suit still perfect despite the day's drama. When Lucy entered the room, he turned to face her with cold eyes. 24 hours, he said without greeting her. That's how long you were gone. 24 hours to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. Richard, I needed time to think. Think about what? We had everything planned out. The house, the honeymoon, our future. What could possibly be more important than that? Lucy looked around the room at the faces staring at her. Her parents, her sister who had flown in for the wedding. Richard's business partners who had stayed to help with the crisis. Everyone was waiting for her to apologize, to explain herself, to fix this mess she'd created. But standing there in her ruined dress, all she could think about was the peace she'd felt in Daniel's cabin, the honest conversation, the beauty he'd created with his own hands, the way he'd looked at her like she was still the girl he'd fallen in love with years ago. "I need more time," she said quietly. Richard's face went white with rage. "More time? Lucy, I've already had to cancel the honeymoon. I've had to explain to my business associates why my bride ran off with some mountain hermit. How much more embarrassment do you expect me to endure?" "This isn't about embarrassing you," Lucy said, finding her voice. "This is about my life. My choice." "Your choice?" Her father stepped forward. "Lucy, you have responsibilities. A career, commitments, a reputation to think about. You can't throw all of that away for some childhood fantasy." "What if it's not a fantasy?" Lucy asked. "What if the life I've been living is the fantasy?" The room went silent. Lucy's sister was the first to speak. "Lucy, are you saying you're in love with this mountain man?" Before Lucy could answer, Richard interrupted. "It doesn't matter what she thinks she feels. I've done some research on this Daniel Morrison. Did you know he's been investigated by the county for hunting without permits? Did you know there are complaints about him trespassing on private property?" Lucy felt her heart sink. "That's not true. Danny would never." "Oh, but it is true," Richard continued, pulling out a folder of papers. "I had my lawyer look into his background. This man is a criminal, Lucy. He's been living illegally in the mountains for years." Lucy grabbed the papers and read them quickly. There were indeed complaints filed against Daniel. Hunting violations, trespassing, failure to pay property taxes on land that apparently didn't belong to him. "You see," her father said, "this man has been lying to you. He's not some romantic figure living free in the mountains. He's a criminal who's been avoiding his responsibilities for years." Lucy felt sick. Had she been wrong about Daniel? Had she let her emotions cloud her judgment about who he really was? Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Richard hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Daniel's life, determined to prove he was dangerous or unstable. The law firm where Lucy worked called to express concern about the negative publicity affecting their reputation. Her friends from the city called to ask if she'd lost her mind. But the worst part was the doubt that crept into Lucy's own mind. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was throwing away a good life for a fantasy based on childhood memories. Then, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who ran the town's historical society, came to visit Lucy's family. "I hear you've been listening to stories about Daniel Morrison," she said, settling into the living room with a cup of tea. "Well, I have some stories of my own." Mrs. Patterson had lived in Pine Valley her entire life and knew everyone's business. What she told Lucy's family changed everything. Those hunting violations? Daniel was feeding the Williams family when Tom Williams lost his job and they couldn't afford groceries. He brought them deer meat to get them through the winter. And the trespassing? He was fixing Mrs. Garcia's roof for free because she couldn't afford a contractor. Lucy listened in amazement as Mrs. Patterson continued. "That man has been quietly helping people in this town for years. He fixed my porch steps when I couldn't manage them anymore. He chopped firewood for half the elderly folks in town. He never asked for anything in return and never told anyone about it." "But what about the property taxes?" Richard demanded. "He's been living on land that doesn't belong to him." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Oh, but it does belong to him. Daniel has been buying up mountain land piece by piece for years. Not just the land where his cabin sits, but hundreds of acres around it. He pays his taxes through a lawyer in the city, which is why the county records got confused." Lucy felt her world shift again. Why would he buy so much land? "To protect it," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "There are developers who want to build ski resorts and shopping centers up in those mountains. Daniel has been quietly buying land to keep it wild. He spent every penny he's made from his woodworking to save those mountains." Richard's face went red. "That's impossible. A man living in a cabin without electricity couldn't afford to buy hundreds of acres of land." But Mrs. Patterson had more surprises. Daniel Morrison might dress like a mountain man, but he's been selling his furniture and artwork to galleries in Denver and Salt Lake City for years. That man is probably worth more than most of the businessmen in this town, including you, Mr. Blackwood." Lucy sank into a chair, overwhelmed by this new information. Daniel wasn't a failure or a criminal, or a crazy hermit. He was a successful artist and a secret philanthropist who had dedicated his life to helping others and protecting the land he loved. "Why didn't he tell me any of this?" she whispered. "Maybe because he wanted you to love him for who he is, not what he owns," Mrs. Patterson suggested gently. That night, Lucy lay awake thinking about everything she'd learned. Daniel had built a life of purpose and meaning, even if it wasn't the kind of life society typically valued. He'd found a way to be successful while staying true to himself. Meanwhile, what had she built? A career that stressed her out, an engagement to a man who cared more about his reputation than her happiness, a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt empty on the inside. As dawn broke over Pine Valley, Lucy made a decision that would surprise everyone, including herself. She was going back up the mountain, and this time she was going to ask Daniel some hard questions about their future. But first, she had to do something even harder. She had to break up with Richard and face the consequences of choosing love over security. Part 5. Coming full circle, Lucy knew she had to end things with Richard before she could move forward with anything else. She found him in his hotel room, on the phone with his lawyer, still trying to find ways to make Daniel look bad. "Richard, we need to talk," she said as he hung up the phone. "Good. I've been thinking about this situation and I believe we can salvage things. We'll have a small ceremony next week, just family. We can tell people you had a nervous breakdown from wedding stress." Lucy stared at him in disbelief. "You want to tell people I had a nervous breakdown? It's better than the truth." "Richard," said matter-of-factly, "it explains your irrational behavior without making me look like a fool." In that moment, Lucy realized she had never really known this man she'd almost married. The Richard she'd fallen for had been charming and attentive, but now she could see it had all been performance. When faced with a real crisis, he cared more about his image than her feelings. "Richard, I can't marry you," she said quietly. His face went white, then red. "Because of that mountain man?" "Lucy, be realistic. What kind of life could you have with someone like that? You're a successful lawyer. You have a reputation to maintain." "Maybe that reputation isn't worth maintaining," Lucy said. "Maybe I've been living someone else's idea of success instead of my own." Richard stood up and began pacing. "This is temporary insanity. In a few weeks, when the excitement wears off, you'll realize what a mistake you're making. I'm willing to wait." "Don't wait," Lucy said firmly. "I'm sorry for hurting you, but this isn't about Daniel. This is about us. We were never right for each other. We were just convenient." The breakup was ugly. Richard called her ungrateful and delusional. He threatened to ruin her career, to tell everyone she was mentally unstable. Lucy listened to it all and realized she felt nothing but relief. She should have ended things months ago before it got this far. The next morning, Lucy hiked back, up to Daniel's cabin. She found him chopping wood behind his house, his movements rhythmic and peaceful. When he saw her, he stopped and leaned on his axe. "I heard about the investigation," he said before she could speak. "I'm sorry you had to find out about the legal troubles that way." "Mrs. Patterson told me the real story," Lucy replied. "About the families you helped, about the land you've been buying. Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel set down his axe and sat on the porch steps. "Because I didn't want you to think I was trying to impress you. When you left 15 years ago, I was just a poor kid with no prospects. I didn't want you to come back to me because I'd finally made something of myself." Lucy sat down beside him. "What did you want me to come back for?" "Because you remembered what we had together. Because you missed the person you were when we were together. Because love is more important than anything else." They sat in comfortable silence, looking out over the valley where they'd both grown. Up, Lucy could see the town below, the house where she'd lived as a child, the streets where they'd walked together as teenagers planning their futures. "Danny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." always. Do you really want me here? Not the memory of who I used to be, but who I am now. Because I'm not the same girl who left for college. I'm complicated and sometimes difficult. I have opinions about everything. I can't cook very well, and I've never lived without electricity. Daniel smiled. Lucy, I've been alone for 10 years. I think I can handle a woman with opinions who can't cook. But what would we do? I can't just move up here and pretend to be someone I'm not. Who says you have to pretend? Daniel stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. I've been thinking about this since your wedding day. What if we combined our skills? You know the legal system, I know the land. We could work together to protect more of these mountains. Lucy felt a spark of excitement. Like a conservation foundation? Exactly. There are developers circling this area like vultures. They want to turn these mountains into parking lots and shopping centers. But if we could buy the land first, protect it legally, we could save the whole area. Lucy finished, her mind already working through the legal possibilities. And you could still practice law, environmental law, working with conservation groups helping small communities fight big developers. It's not the corporate law you've been doing, but it's still law. For the first time in years, Lucy felt truly excited about work. This wasn't just a job or a career. It was a mission that mattered. There's something else, Daniel said, looking nervous. My sister Beth is coming to visit next week. She's bringing her kids and she's 8 months pregnant and her husband left her. She needs somewhere to stay while she figures out her life. Lucy felt a flutter of panic. You want me to meet your family? I want to know if you're serious about building a life with me. Because it's not just me you'd be taking on. I have responsibilities, people I care about. Beth and her kids are going to need help. Lucy thought about her orderly life in the city, her clean apartment, her predictable schedule. Then she thought about the joy on Daniel's face when he talked about his sister, the way he'd sacrificed his own dreams to take care of family. I'd like to meet them, she said, surprising herself. Daniel's face lit up with relief and happiness. Really? Really. But Danny, I need to be honest too. This scares me. I've spent 15 years building a life that's safe and predictable. This would be the opposite of that. I know, and if you decide it's too much, I'll understand. Lucy stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out over the mountains that had shaped both their lives. Remember when we were kids and we used to talk about running away together? To see the world, have adventures, live life on our own terms. Maybe we're finally old enough to actually do it. Daniel joined her at the railing. It won't be easy. We'll have to work hard to make the Conservation Foundation succeed. We'll have to deal with people in town who think I'm crazy and you've lost your mind. Your parents are going to hate this decision. Probably, Lucy agreed. But for the first time in 15 years, I feel like I'm making a choice that's completely mine. 2 weeks later, Lucy stood once again in front of the little mountain chapel. But this time everything was different. She wore a simple blue dress instead of an elaborate white gown. Instead of hundreds of guests, there were only a dozen people. Daniel's sister and her children, Mrs. Patterson, a few close friends who supported their decision. Her parents hadn't come. They were still hoping she'd change her mind and return to her sensible life in the city. But Lucy wasn't looking back anymore. The ceremony was performed by the same minister who had married couples in this chapel for 30 years. Instead of expensive flowers, Lucy carried wildflowers that Daniel had picked that morning. Instead of a fancy reception, they planned to have a simple dinner at his cabin. As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to build a life based on love and shared purpose, Lucy felt something she'd never experienced at her first almost wedding. She felt completely sure. Do you, Lucy Chen, take Daniel Morrison to be your husband, to share in his dreams and support his goals, to build a life together based on honesty and love? I do, Lucy said, looking into the brown eyes that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. Do you, Daniel Morrison, take Lucy Chen to be your wife, to encourage her ambitions and share her adventures, to be her partner in all things? I do, Daniel said, his voice strong and sure. As they kissed to seal their marriage, Lucy heard applause from their small group of supporters. But more than that, She heard something she'd been missing for years, the sound of her own heart beating, with genuine happiness. 6 months later, the Pine Valley Conservation Foundation was officially established. Lucy had moved her law practice to focus entirely on environmental and land use issues. Daniel's furniture business was thriving, with a waiting list of customers who wanted pieces made by the famous Mountain Man artist. They'd bought and protected over 1,000 acres of mountain land, and other communities were asking for their help in fighting development. Lucy had never been happier or more challenged in her work. Daniel's sister and her children had moved into a house in town, with Daniel's help, and Beth was teaching at the local elementary school. The kids visited the mountain cabin every weekend, and Lucy was learning to be an aunt to children who called her Aunt Lucy and treated her like family from day one. Richard had married his secretary 6 months after Lucy left him, in what the society pages called the wedding of the year. Lucy had sent them a congratulations card and felt nothing but relief that she'd escaped that life. On their first anniversary, Lucy and Daniel hiked to the place where the old oak tree had stood, the tree where they'd carved their initials as teenagers. A new oak had been planted there, still small but growing strong. No regrets? Daniel asked as they sat under the young tree. Lucy thought about everything she'd given up, the big salary, the social status, the approval of her family. Then she thought about everything she'd gained, work that mattered, love that was real, a life that felt authentic. "Only one regret," she said. Daniel looked worried. "What's that?" "That it took us 15 years to find our way back to each other." Daniel smiled and pulled her close. "Maybe we needed those 15 years to become the people we were meant to be."